The cold metal door slid open with a long groan, and the prisoner was dragged inside, his feet scraping against the smooth floor, his wrists bound with heavy chains that clinked loudly, with every step the sound echoing in the vast chamber, as if announcing the arrival of something unwanted. And strange 100 alien eyes turned toward him, their strange shapes glowing faintly in the dim light of the hall, and almost at once the air filled with cruel laughter. The laughter was sharp and mocking, like the sound of broken glass in the wind, the aliens leaning forward in their seats as they jeered at the human, calling him weak, calling him primitive, calling him worthless, their voices carrying across the chamber. Like waves of scorn, the words were in their own tongue, yet the tone was clear to anyone. It was the voice of those who believed they were greater, and those who believed they had captured something small and unimportant. Two guards with broad, scaled shoulders shoved him forward, their clawed hands gripping the chains tightly. Until his arms burned, they pushed him under the blinding white lights at the center of the hall, forcing him to his knees, the metal floor cold and hard. Beneath him, shadows of towering alien figures falling across his body, the scent of burning metal drifting in the air from torches that hissed at the edges of the room. Above him, the alien council sat on a curved platform, their seats carved from black stone and lined with strips of silver. Each council member wore robes of deep crimson and silver threads, and their faces were painted with patterns that marked their rank. They looked down at the human with eyes that glimmered like polished obsidian, some with curiosity, some with open hatred. The leader in the center leaned back in his high seat, and his thin mouth curved into a slow, cruel smile. The guards tightened their grip, ready for any sign of resistance, but the human did not resist. His head was held high, his eyes steady and calm. They were not the eyes of someone broken or afraid. Instead, there was something still and deep in them, something that did not belong to a prisoner in chains. It was the kind of look that could unsettle even the most confident captor. The aliens called out again, their voices layering over each other like the roar of a crowd at a cruel sport. One shouted that this human had been caught sneaking through restricted territory. Another claimed he was nothing more than a thief of scraps. Another laughed that Earth must be a pathetic world if this was the kind of warrior. It sent their words were sharp like knives. But the human gave no answer. He only looked at them with that same calm. One young alien soldier at the edge of the chamber frowned as he watched. There was something wrong here, something that did not fit the picture they had been told of humans. They had been told humans begged. They had been told humans trembled. But this one sat silent, as if waiting for something, as if the mockery around him did not even exist. A guard leaned down and hissed a warning into the human's ear, telling him that before this day ended, he would kneel, not because they forced him, but because the Supreme Commander would demand it. The name of the Supreme Commander seemed to hang in the air for a moment like the shadow of a great storm, but the human gave no sign of hearing or caring. His eyes still scanned the chamber, as if mapping every face and every corner. The council leader spoke, then, his voice deep and heavy as stone. He asked the human his name, but the human remained silent. This made the council laugh again. The leader ordered the guards to remove the human's outer clothes so they could see if he carried any hidden weapons or devices. The guards began to obey, pulling at the rough cloth around his shoulders, but stopped when the council leader raised a hand. Something had caught his attention. The human had moved only slightly, but it was enough to make the leader's eyes narrow. He had shifted his weight in a way that was careful, deliberate, not the movement of a desperate prisoner, but the movement of someone who was saving his strength for the right moment. The leader studied him a long time, then leaned back again and said they would wait until the Supreme Commander arrived to decide the fate of this strange creature from Earth. The laughter in the chamber softened into murmurs, some amused, some uneasy, and the human still did not move. The silence around him was heavy now, the chains between his wrists swaying gently, as if they too were waiting for something to happen. A guard stepped closer and prodded him with the end of a long spear, but the human only looked up into the alien's face with that same deep calm. Some of the aliens began whispering to each other, the sound of their low voices like the hiss of wind through old pipes. They spoke of the Supreme Commander, they spoke of his temper, they spoke of how he had once ordered the execution of an entire crew for failing to respect him, and how he never spared a prisoner from Earth. If this human thought he could survive the encounter, he was either a fool or something far more dangerous than he appeared. The young soldier, still watching from the side, felt a cold unease in his chest. He leaned toward another soldier and whispered a question, asking if the human even knew where he was, and the other soldier gave a short, bitter laugh, saying no human could understand the weight of this place, no human could stand here and not break under its power. But the young soldier was not so sure. The human's steady eyes seemed to be looking through the walls themselves. Then from far beyond the thick doors at the far end of the chamber, a sound began to rise. It was deep and low, at first like the call of some ancient beast, and it grew louder with each moment until it was clear that it was not an animal at all, but the horn of the command chamber, a sound that made even the mocking aliens straighten in their seats. The young soldier froze, his whisper dying in his throat, as every head in the chamber turned toward the great doors waiting for them to open. And the human, still in chains, only closed his eyes for a moment, as if the sound was something he had been expecting all along. The sound beyond the great doors was growing heavier with each moment, a slow, steady rhythm of footsteps that echoed through the corridors like the beat of some great war drum. The air in the chamber seemed to grow tighter with each step, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, and the mocking voices from before had now turned to uneasy silence. The alien guards shifted their stance, their claws tightening on their weapons, while the council members leaned forward, their eyes fixed on the entrance. The young alien soldier who had whispered before now felt his skin prickle with cold, his instincts warning him that this was no ordinary arrival. He had never seen the Supreme Commander in person, and neither had most in the room, for the commander rarely left the command spire unless the matter was of the highest importance. And yet here, he was coming for a human prisoner, something that made no sense at all. The human still knelt in the center, his chains resting heavy on the floor, his head slightly tilted, as if listening carefully to the approaching sound. He looked neither afraid nor curious, but rather as if he were remembering something, the faintest flicker of a smile ghosting across his face for only a moment before vanishing again. The young soldier noticed it, and his unease deepened. One of the guards stepped closer to the prisoner and hissed that he would kneel lower when the commander entered or lose his head. Where he knelt, the threat hung in the air like a blade, but the human gave no reply. His calm was so unshaken that even the guard who had spoken took a step back, his eyes narrowing in frustration. The council leader signaled for silence, his long fingers curling around the armrest of his throne like the talons of a hunting beast. The chamber obeyed the order instantly, every voice falling quiet, until only the sound of those deliberate footsteps filled the air, and as they drew nearer, the vibrations began to tremble through the metal floor beneath them. From behind the great doors came the faint clatter of ceremonial weapons, the sharp ring of armored boots striking the floor in perfect unison. The procession of the Supreme Commander was not a simple arrival. It was a display of power meant to remind every living thing in its presence of the one who ruled them. The young soldier could feel his heart pounding, his mind telling him to lower his gaze when the doors opened, but still his eyes flicked toward the prisoner. The human was sitting straighter now, his shoulders squared, his gaze fixed on the entrance, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. The heavy locks on the great doors began to shift, each one sliding open with the deep grind of ancient machinery. The sound was so loud it filled the chamber like rolling thunder. Shadows flickered as light from the outer corridor spilled into the room. Cold and pale, the guards nearest the doors straightened their backs, gripping their spears tightly, their faces unreadable behind masks of discipline. Then the doors began to part with a slow, relentless motion, revealing a towering figure in gleaming silver armor, every inch of it carved with symbols of battles won and enemies crushed. The Supreme Commander stepped forward, his presence filling the chamber like a storm front, his cape of black and red trailing behind him, his face hidden behind a mask of black steel shaped into the fierce visage of a predator from their homeworld. A line of elite guards followed close behind, their armor darker and more refined than the rest, their weapons not ceremonial but sharpened for war, each one moving in perfect step with the commander, their eyes never leaving him, as if a shadow was the only thing that mattered in the universe. The council members lowered their heads as the commander entered, their voices silent, their movements still. The mocking aliens who had jeered moments ago now sat frozen, their earlier cruelty replaced by the heavy weight of fear. The only sound in the chamber was the soft metallic ring of the commander's boots striking the floor. The Supreme Commander stopped several steps away from the human prisoner, towering over him, the mask turned slightly, as if studying him in silence. The human did not look away, his gaze met the black steel faceplate. Without flinching, there was a long pause in which neither moved, neither spoke, and yet the tension in the air felt ready to snap. The commander began to walk in a slow circle around the human, his armored boots moving in steady rhythm, the chains of the prisoner rattling softly as his head turned to follow him. The aliens in the room exchanged uneasy glances, the scene before them strange and unlike any prisoner's trial they had seen before. The young soldier watching from the edge felt as if the temperature in the chamber had dropped, his breath coming slow and shallow. The Supreme Commander was not speaking, but something about the way he moved, the way his gaze lingered on the human, suggested recognition, not curiosity. When the commander completed his circle, he stopped directly in front of the prisoner, standing tall and silent. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he reached up and unlatched the mask, pulling it free and revealing a face that was strong and severe, his eyes a deep shade of silver that seemed to hold memories far older than the war at hand. Those eyes locked onto the human, and something in them shifted. The calm cruelty in the commander's expression faded, replaced by a strange, unreadable tension. The silence in the room grew so heavy that it seemed even the air refused to move. The commander leaned forward slightly, his gaze unblinking, his voice low when he finally spoke. The words were quiet enough that only those closest could hear, yet the sound carried like a blade sliding from its sheath. And though the words were in the alien tongue, the human understood them, his lips parting in the faintest of smiles. The council members exchanged quick, sharp looks, wondering what had just been said and why the commander's eyes seemed to burn with something almost like recognition. The young soldier's skin crawled with a strange sense of foreboding. He could feel that whatever had just passed between them was no ordinary exchange. It was something older, something deeper. And then the horn sounded again, this time from within the chamber itself, the deep note ringing against the walls like the opening of an ancient rite. The commander did not move, the human did not blink, and the entire room seemed to hold still, as if the next breath might decide the fate of everyone present. The Supreme Commander stood, unmoving, his silver eyes locked on the human. As the great doors slowly closed behind him, the deep clang of the locks falling into place echoed through the chamber like the final stroke of a war drum. The air felt thick now, as though each breath had to be dragged through the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. The council sat frozen, their faces tense, as they waited for the commander to speak. But his silence was more powerful than any order he could give. The human remained kneeling, his chains pooled at his side, the faint clink of metal, the only sound between them. He did not bow his head, he did not avert his gaze, and there was something in his posture that made it seem as though he were the one in control. The watching aliens could not understand it, for a prisoner should have been trembling, yet the one before them seemed carved from stone, his calm a quiet defiance that made the room uneasy. The commander took one slow step forward, the sound of his armored boot ringing across the floor like a strike against a great shield. His shadow fell over the human, long and sharp under the blinding lights. He studied the prisoner's face as if searching for something not yet confirmed, his jaw tight, his breath deep and steady. The human's face remained unreadable, but there was the faintest narrowing of his eyes, as though he too was studying the commander. Moving with deliberate precision, the commander began to walk in a wide arc around the prisoner, his gaze never leaving the man in chains, every step measured, every pause deliberate. The elite guards who had entered with him shifted slightly to keep the circle secure, their weapons gleaming under the harsh light, but their eyes flickered with curiosity, for this was not the usual treatment of a human captive. Usually the commander would give a short command, and the matter would be settled in moments. Yet here he lingered. The aliens in the crowd began to murmur, low voices whispering theories and questions why the Supreme Commander would waste time circling a human, why he would not simply order the execution or interrogation. The council leader frowned and raised a hand for silence, his gaze moving from the commander to the human and back again. The tension in the room deepened. The young soldier at the edge of the chamber could feel the hair on the back of his neck rise. He remembered the stories told in hushed voices of the commander meeting warriors on distant worlds, and sometimes sparing them not for mercy, but from something older, something bound by oath and memory. But those were only stories, and this was real before his eyes. The soldier could not stop watching the way the commander's silver gaze seemed to carry weight like the memory of a long-forgotten battle. At last the commander stopped directly in front of the prisoner, his towering frame casting a shadow that swallowed the kneeling man. He reached up and with slow, deliberate care, unlatched the final locks on his armor. The hiss of released pressure filled the air as he lifted the black steel mask from his face, revealing the scars of old wars crossing his strong features, his eyes the color of storm clouds over cold oceans. The human looked at those eyes, and for the first time his calm expression shifted. There was recognition, there a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. The commander's gaze sharpened, and without turning his head, he asked a question in a voice deep and steady, his words low yet sharp enough to cut through the silence. The alien tongue rolled easily from his mouth, yet the human did not hesitate before replying in the same language, his voice quiet but firm, carrying clearly across the chamber. Gasps echoed from the council seats, several leaning forward in shock. The young soldier's heart pounded in his chest, for it was rare for a human to know even a fragment of their language. Yet this one spoke it with perfect precision, as though it were his own. The commander's eyes narrowed, and for a long breath he said nothing, as if weighing the truth of what he had just heard. The crowd's whispers grew louder, the guards shifting uneasily, unsure whether to see the human as a threat or as something else entirely. The commander's gaze did not waver, and the humans did not falter, each holding the other in a locked silence that seemed older than the walls around them. Slowly the commander moved closer until he was within arm's reach of the prisoner. He leaned down slightly, his voice lowering to a tone only the human could hear. The words that followed made the human's eyes darken with a strange gravity, but he gave only the smallest of nods in reply. Whatever had passed between them was hidden from the rest, yet its weight was heavy enough to press the air tighter in the room. The council leader rose from his seat, his voice sharp, as he demanded to know the meaning of this delay and why the commander had not yet pronounced judgment. The supreme commander turned his head slightly toward the council, but his eyes remained on the human. His voice, when it came, was calm, yet carried a quiet force that silenced every whisper in the chamber. He said the judgment would come soon, but not before certain truths were confirmed. The council members exchanged uneasy glances, some frowning, some shifting, as if they did not agree, but none dared to challenge him outright. The young soldier could feel the energy in the room shifting from mockery to something heavier, something close to fear. He did not understand why, yet he knew something important was about to unfold. The supreme commander stepped back at last, his armor catching the light, his silver eyes still locked on the human. He gave a signal to his guards, a small gesture that only they would understand. The guards tightened their circle, not in threat, but in protection, as though the prisoner was now something to be guarded from the others rather than restrained. The murmurs in the crowd swelled once more, and the council leader's face darkened with confusion and anger, but he did not speak again, for the horn sounded a second time, this one closer and deeper, the resonance shaking the floor. The sound rolled through the chamber like the voice of the past, calling something forward. The commander did not move. The human did not bow. The air hung heavy, waiting for the next moment to strike. Gasps rippled through the chamber as the supreme commander and the human prisoner locked eyes, the silver in the commander's gaze meeting the unshaken calm in the human's, as though the years between them meant nothing. The silence was so deep that even the faint hum of the chamber's lights seemed distant. The council members leaned forward, their robes shifting against the carved stone seats. The guards stood stiff as blades, unsure whether to prepare for violence or witness something else entirely. The human tilted his head slightly, his lips curling in the faintest of smiles, as though he had been expecting this meeting for longer than anyone in the room could imagine. It was not the smile of arrogance, but the quiet recognition of a moment that had been inevitable. The commander's jaw tightened, his breath steady, but slower than before, as if he too was holding back the weight of something that could not yet be spoken aloud. The young alien soldier, watching from the edge, felt a strange heaviness in his chest, a thought whispering in his mind that the two before him had seen each other before, though that was impossible, for no record spoke of such a meeting, and yet the way they stood, the way their eyes spoke without words, made the idea feel not only possible, but certain. The soldier felt the air shift around them, as if some unseen current had begun to pull at the chamber walls. The council leader's voice broke the silence, sharp and impatient, demanding to know why the commander hesitated and whether this human had revealed some hidden truth. But the commander ignored the question, his focus fixed entirely on the man in chains. His voice When it came was low, almost private, yet still audible to those in the near seats. He asked a single question in their ancient tongue of language, so old that many in the chamber could barely understand it. Without hesitation, the human answered in that same ancient speech, his tone smooth and flawless, carrying the rhythm and weight of someone who had spoken it long before the council leader was even born. The reaction was immediate. A wave of whispers broke through the chamber, the younger aliens turning to one another in shock, the elders leaning back in their seats with narrowed eyes, trying to piece together how this human had learned words long lost to most of their kind. The commander stepped closer, his shadow spilling across the human's face, his eyes narrowing as he searched for the smallest sign of deceit, but found none. The human's calm never wavered, his gaze steady, as if challenging the commander to remember the truth. The corners of the commander's mouth shifted ever so slightly, not in a smile, but in something heavier, a memory pressing at the edge of the present. One of the elder council members spoke up, his voice brittle with age, claiming that the human's face matched a fragment in the oldest war archives, an image recorded in the aftermath of a great battle when a lone off-world warrior had fought beside their people before vanishing into the stars. The chamber grew tense, the younger alien scoffing, while the elders looked uneasy, for the story was considered more legend than history. The young soldier's heart pounded as he realized what the elder meant. He had heard the tale whispered during training, how the warrior had saved the life of a young royal during the siege of Vareth, how the royal had sworn a life debt that would never be broken. A story meant to teach loyalty, not to be taken as truth. And yet here, in the council chamber, the pieces began to align. The Supreme Commander's eyes flickered for the first time with something other than control, a flash of memory, a battlefield bathed in fire, the roar of alien engines, the shadow of a warrior standing against impossible odds. The image came and went like a breath, but it left its mark. His voice deepened as he asked the human another question, one only that warrior would know the answer to. The human's reply came without hesitation, the words cutting through the silence like a blade, every syllable carrying the weight of years and the weight of promises made in blood. The commander exhaled slowly, and the tension in his shoulders shifted, his stance changing almost imperceptibly. Yet the guards noticed the change and exchanged uneasy glances. The council leader demanded again to know the meaning of this exchange, his tone rising with each word, but the commander did not turn to him. Instead, he reached down and with a slow, deliberate motion placed his gauntlet hand beneath the prisoner's chin, lifting his face slightly, so that their eyes met fully in the light. The chamber seemed to tighten, as though the walls were leaning in to hear what would come next. In a voice just loud enough for all to hear, the commander spoke, not to the council, not to the guards, but to the human. He said that the galaxy had long believed the warrior dead. Yet here, he was unchanged by time, his presence a sign that the tides of war were about to shift. The words sent a ripple of unease through the chamber, for such things were not spoken lightly by the Supreme Commander. The human's eyes glinted faintly in the harsh light, his voice calm as he said that he had returned not for revenge nor for honor, but because something far greater was coming, something that would not spare human or alien alike. The words seemed to hang in the air, refusing to fade, their weight sinking into the minds of all who heard them. The young soldier swallowed hard, his grip tightening on his weapon, though he did not know why. He felt the faint tremor of something in the air, a sense that the chamber itself was listening as the two figures before him stood locked in a moment that felt both ancient and new. The whispers from the crowd had stilled, now replaced by the heavy quiet of anticipation. The commander released the human's chin, his gaze never leaving him, the silver in his eyes darkening as though shadowed by thought. He turned slightly toward the council, but did not address them. Instead, he took one step back, still facing the prisoner, and said in a voice that left no room for doubt that the next decision made in this chamber would change the course of their war. The horn sounded again, deep and resonant this time from somewhere within the walls themselves, as if the entire structure was alive and calling attention to what was about to happen. The sound washed over the chamber and left a strange stillness in its wake. The commander's hand hovered just above the hilt of the blade at his side, but he did not draw it. The human did not move, his chain silent now, as if even they waited. And the young soldier knew without doubt that whatever came next would not only decide the fate of the prisoner, but might decide the fate of them all. The echo of the horn still lingered in the air like the last breath before a storm. The Supreme Commander stood in silence, his silver eyes fixed on the human, while the council shifted uneasily in their seats. The chamber fell heavier. Now the mocking arrogance that had once filled it gone, replaced by a wary tension that seeped into every corner. The guards stood at full attention, gripping their weapons, but their eyes betrayed curiosity, as if they too sensed that something far older than war was unfolding before them. The human met the commander's gaze with steady calm, his shoulders straight despite the weight of the chains, his face a mask of control, but his eyes holding depths that could not be faked. The young alien soldier at the edge of the hall could not look away from him. There was something about this man that demanded attention, not through force or threat, but through the quiet power of someone who had walked through fire and returned untouched. The Supreme Commander stepped forward, his armored boots ringing against the cold floor, each step slow and deliberate. He spoke, then his voice low, but carrying through the chamber, every word heavy with authority. He asked the human to speak the truth of who he was before this council, before all who watched. For there were whispers that his presence here was no accident, that his survival through the siege lines was no miracle, but a return. The human did not answer immediately. Instead, he lowered his head just slightly, as if weighing the choice. Then, when he spoke, his voice was calm and measured, carrying in perfect clarity across the chamber. He spoke of a battle long ago when the skies over the world of Vareth had burned with fire, when alien warships filled the heavens, and the air was thick with the smell of ash. He spoke of how he had fought not for conquest, but for survival, and how, in the chaos, he had crossed paths with a young alien prince. The crowd shifted at the words, the elders glancing toward one another, their eyes narrowing in sudden recognition, for the tale was one buried deep in the archives. The young soldier felt his breath catch as the human continued speaking of the prince who had been cornered by enemy soldiers, how the human had cut through them with nothing but a scavenged blade and sheer will, how he had dragged the wounded prince through the burning ruins to safety at the cost of his own escape. The Supreme Commander's eyes did not move from the human's face, but there was a subtle change in their depths, the flicker of memory, the tightening of his jaw, the stillness of someone remembering not a story, but a moment lived. The human spoke then of the oath made by the prince, an oath of life, dead, a vow that the human would never be forgotten, and that if ever he returned, he would be met not as an enemy, but as an ally. The chamber was silent now, save for the faint hum of the lights and the slow, measured breathing of those who listened. The council leader sat stiff in his seat, his fingers gripping the carved stone armrest, his expression caught between disbelief and unease, for such a vow, if true, would bind the Supreme Commander in ways that could not be broken without dishonor. The young soldier's heart pounded as he realized the truth in the human's voice. There was no hesitation, no searching for the right words. This was not a performance. This was memory carved deep, the kind of memory that carried weight even across years and worlds. The Supreme Commander took a single step closer and spoke in the ancient tongue, asking the human for the name the prince had given him in gratitude, a name no record had ever preserved. Without pause, the human answered the name, flowing from his lips like the turning of a key in a long-locked door, and in that instant the change in the commander was unmistakable. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly, and his gaze softened, though only for a heartbeat, before the steel returned. The name echoed in the chamber, carried by whispers from alien to alien, as if testing its sound after years of silence. The commander spoke then to the council, his voice calm, but with an edge that left no room for argument. He declared that this man was no ordinary prisoner, but the warrior who had saved his life in the fires of Vareth, that he stood here not in chains, but in honor, and that any insult against him would be an insult against the commander himself. The words struck the chamber like a blow, some council members straightening in respect, while others stiffened in outrage. The council leader rose, his voice sharp with challenge. He argued that the human was still from a world outside their rule, that his presence could still be a threat, that personal debts should not outweigh the safety of the empire. But the commander did not waver. His voice was cold as he said that the safety of the empire might one day rest on this man's shoulders, and that he alone would decide his fate. The human finally lifted his chin fully, his eyes sweeping the chamber. As he spoke again, his tone still calm, but carrying a weight that seemed to press against the very walls. He said that he had not returned to claim the debt owed him. He had not come to seek favor or protection. He had come because something was moving in the dark beyond their borders, something older than any of their wars, something that would consume them all if they did not stand together. The murmurs returned, now mixed with fear and disbelief. Some laughed under their breath, as if dismissing it as a human's attempt to gain leverage, but others leaned forward, their eyes narrowing As they listened, the young soldier felt a chill along his spine, for there was no hint of manipulation in the human's words, only the blunt truth of someone who had seen what was coming and had no time to waste convincing those who would not listen. The Supreme Commander's gaze never left the human's face, his silver eyes searching for any trace of falsehood, and finding none, he nodded. Once, a gesture so slight that most would have missed it, he turned back to the council and spoke only 3 words in the ancient tongue, words that meant the time has come. The weight of those words settled like iron in the room. Even those who did not know the language could feel their gravity. And as the last echo faded, the chamber doors rumbled again, not with the arrival of ceremony, but with the heavy pounding of fists against metal. The alarm lights flared to life, bathing the chamber in red. The young soldier's hand flew to his weapon as the Supreme Commander turned sharply toward the sound, and the human's calm expression shifted at last into something darker, something that spoke of war at the doorstep. The pounding on the chamber doors grew louder, each strike sending a shiver through the massive stone walls, as though the fortress itself could feel the force behind it. The red light from the alarms washed over the gathered council, casting their faces in blood like shadows. The Supreme Commander moved with a suddenness that made the guards step back, his voice sharp as he ordered the gates sealed, and every soldier to stand ready. The council leader shouted for an explanation, but his words were drowned by the echo of another massive blow, this one bending the reinforced metal inward with a sickening groan. The human stood motionless, his chains still hanging from his wrists, but his eyes fixed on the shaking doors. The young soldier beside him felt his throat tighten as the air seemed to thicken with something unseen, like the charged silence before a lightning strike. The human spoke then in a low voice that carried over the noise, telling them this was not a random attack. This was the thing he had warned of, the thing that had been moving in the dark beyond their borders. The Supreme Commander turned toward him, his expression unreadable, but his silver eyes gleaming with a flicker of recognition, as if the words had stirred an unwelcome memory. The doors took another strike, and this time the locking mechanism screamed under the pressure, ancient metal buckling as sparks burst into the air. The guards formed a shield wall in front of the council, their weapons raised and humming with energy. The council leader barked for the prisoner to be removed, but the commander ignored him and instead gave a sharp gesture toward the human. The young soldier obeyed, without hesitation, stepping forward to release the manacles from the human's wrists. The sound of the chains hitting the floor was lost under the deafening crack as one of the doors split along its hinges. The chamber filled with the deep rumbling sound of something massive breathing beyond the threshold. The alien scent of ozone and decay rolled in on an invisible wind, making even the hardened veterans grip their weapons tighter. The human stepped forward, now free, his posture straight and his movements slow, like a predator sizing up its prey. He asked the commander how much of their outer defenses still stood, and the answer was grim: less than half. The garrison had returned from the border, and the communications outpost had gone silent hours ago. Before another word could be spoken, the doors exploded inward, the twisted metal crashing to the floor like the bones of some ancient beast, and through the smoke and sparks stepped a figure unlike any the council had seen. It was tall, almost twice the height of a soldier, its form armored in jagged black plates that seemed to drink the light around it. Its eyes burned with an unnatural glow, and from its mouth came a low, guttural sound that seemed to vibrate in the bones of all who heard it. The young soldier felt an instinctive fear grip him, but the human took one step forward without flinching. The thing moved with terrifying speed, crossing the space between them in less than a heartbeat. The guards fired, but their shots glanced harmlessly off the creature's armor, sending ripples of dark energy cascading across its surface. The human shouted for them to stop, telling them the weapons would only feed it, but before the words could sink in, the creature lashed out, sending 3 guards flying across the chamber, their bodies slamming into the stone walls with bone-snapping force. The Supreme Commander drew the massive blade at his side, its surface etched with the ancient symbols of his people, and charged the creature. Their clash rang through the chamber steel against something far harder. The commander's strikes were precise and deadly, but the creature met each one with inhuman strength, forcing him back step by step. The human moved along the edge of the fight, his eyes scanning the creature with the cold precision of someone who had seen such a foe before. The council members shouted for evacuation, but the commander's voice roared above them, all ordering them to remain where they were. He knew if they fled, now the creature would tear through them. Before they could take 3 steps, the human called out, then telling the commander to drive the creature toward the far wall. Where the floor markings formed a circle, the commander hesitated for only a moment before shifting his attacks, forcing the creature back with a series of powerful blows. The young soldier's heart pounded as he realized the human was guiding the fight, not as a spectator, but as someone who understood the rules of this battle. The creature stepped onto the circle, and the human moved with sudden speed, his hand pulling a small black device from his belt. He slammed it against the floor at the edge of the circle, and in an instant glowing lines erupted from the ground, wrapping around the creature like chains of fire. It screamed, then a sound that made the very air shake, and the council members covered their ears in pain. The human shouted for the commander to hold the creature still, and with a final strike from the ancient blade, the commander pinned it in place, the glowing chains tightening until the black armor began to crack. Small lines of light seeping from within. The human's voice was urgent now, saying this was only a scout, that more were coming, that they had minutes at most before the breach widened. The commander asked how many, and the human's answer was grim enough to freeze the room more than they could count. The young soldier could see the fear in the faces of even the oldest warriors, fear not of battle, but of something they could not fight with weapons alone. The human turned to the commander, then his voice lower, but carrying a weight that silenced the entire chamber. He said that if they wanted to live, they would have to trust him completely and prepare for a war unlike any they had faced. The commander's jaw tightened, but he nodded once, his eyes never leaving the human's face. The creature on the floor gave one final wrenching scream before its body shattered into fragments of black crystal, the glowing chains fading into nothing. The sound of its death barely faded when another deep rumble rolled through the floor, as though something far larger was moving beneath them. The red lights flickered once, twice, then went dark, plunging the chamber into shadows, lit only by the fading glow of the circle. In that moment, the young soldier realized that the battle they had just witnessed was nothing more than the first knock at the door, and whatever waited beyond was already stepping through. The chamber was drowned in shadows. The only light came from faint lines of molten red seeping through the cracks in the far wall. Each pulse of light matched the low, deep rumble shaking the floor. The council sat frozen, their voices caught in their throats, as the reality sank in. The creature they had just slain had been nothing more than a messenger. The true force was still coming. The supreme commander stood with his blade at the ready, his silver eyes fixed on the glowing cracks. The young soldier's breath came fast, his heart pounding against his ribs, as if urging him to run, but his legs refused to move. The human stepped forward, his boots silent against the stone floor, his expression unreadable, yet in his calm there was a weight that made every soldier watch him in silence. The wall exploded inward with a force that shook dust and debris from the high ceiling, fragments of stone scattering across the chamber. A wave of heat swept through the air as the opening revealed the silhouette of something enormous, its head brushing the top of the breach, its eyes burning with a gold light that made even the most battle-hardened warriors take a step back. Its body was armored in the same black plates as the smaller creature, but each plate shimmered faintly with an energy that seemed alive. The young soldier's grip tightened on his weapon, but he knew it would be useless. The human turned to the commander, speaking quickly and clearly, telling him that their weapons could not pierce that armor, and that the only way to survive was to follow his instructions exactly, without hesitation. The commander's gaze held the human's for a moment, the weight of centuries of command in his stance, before he gave a single sharp nod. The human moved to the center of the chamber, kneeling and pressing both hands to the floor, whispering words the alien ears could not understand. Lines of faint blue light began to spread from beneath his palms, forming a complex pattern across the stone, each line pulsing faster as the rumbling from the breach grew louder. The golden-eyed giant stepped into the chamber, its movements slow yet full of an unshakable confidence, as though it knew there was nothing in this room that could stop it. The council leader shouted for the guards to attack, but the commander raised his hand, stopping them. His instincts told him to trust the human, though every part of his training fought against the idea The golden-eyed giant stopped just inside the chamber, its gaze fixed on the human, who still knelt in the center of the air. Grew heavy, the temperature dropping sharply as a second layer of the glowing pattern spread across the floor. The young soldier felt a strange pressure in his head, like the weight of a storm pressing against his thoughts. The giant spoke, then its voice like thunder rolling through the bones of every living being in the chamber. The words were in no language they knew, yet each listener felt the meaning. The giant declared the human unworthy of life and offered the council a single chance to hand him over in exchange for their safety. The council leader looked ready to accept, but before he could speak, the commander's voice cut through the air, sharp and unyielding, declaring that no warrior under his watch would be handed to the enemy. The golden eyes narrowed, a ripple of dark energy flowing across its armor. The human rose slowly, his hands still glowing faintly from the floor markings. His eyes locked on the giant as he spoke words that made the room fall utterly silent. He told the giant that he knew its name, that he had seen its world and walked its scorched plains, that he had stood in the ruins of its first citadel and seen the graves of its fallen champions. The giant's steps faltered for the first time, a flicker of something unreadable crossing its burning gaze. The human took another step forward, unarmed, yet radiating a presence that made even the soldiers shift uneasily. He said that if the giant wanted him, it would have to kneel, not as an act of defeat, but as a recognition of the one who had spared its kind long ago. The silence that followed was heavier than the stone walls around them. The giant stood, unmoving, the heat from its armor washing over the chamber. Then, with a sound like grinding mountains, it lowered itself to one knee, the impact shaking the floor. The golden light in its eyes dimmed slightly as its head bowed. The council gasped, some in disbelief, others in awe. The supreme commander stepped forward, his eyes wide, with something between shock and respect as he turned toward the human. The young soldier could not understand what had just happened, but he could feel in the air this was not surrender, this was acknowledgement, the kind of gesture given only once in 1,000 years. The giant spoke again, softer now, its words carrying a weight that made the walls hum. It pledged to withdraw its forces from the borders and to honor the ancient bond the human had invoked. The glowing cracks in the wall began to fade, the oppressive heat lifting from the chamber as the giant rose to its full height once more and stepped back through the breach. The council leader, still trembling, turned to the commander, demanding an explanation, but the commander's eyes never left the human, his voice low, as he said that there were some debts older than empires and some warriors who carried the memory of them alone. The human looked toward the breach, his gaze distant, as though already walking the scorched plains once more. Then he turned to the commander, telling him their world was safe for now, but the enemy would return, and when they did, the bond might not hold. The supreme commander moved toward the center of the chamber, his blade lowered, his expression unreadable then before the eyes of the council, and every soldier present. He dropped to one knee before the human, bowing his head in a gesture no one in the chamber had ever seen. The young soldier felt his breath catch as the realization struck this was the highest honor of their people, a recognition given only to those who had saved not just a life, but the soul of a world. The human accepted the gesture with a simple nod, his eyes calm, yet shadowed by something the others could not name. Outside the breach, the faint glow of a dying sunset cast long shadows across the chamber, and somewhere far beyond the horizon, the storm that had been held back for a single day began to gather again.